that are used and the tropes that repeat themselves on campuses around the world in this lethal narrative, and as part of what Dr. Landis calls the cognitive war against Israel. So today, very briefly, I wanted to go over some of the manifestations of this new anti-Semitism that is a combination of what Israel has been made to look like to the world through the eyes of those who wish to weaken and destroy it. When I give these lectures, I typically like to refer to Melanie Phillips' remarkable book, The World Turned Upside Down. And in it, she describes in her own Britain how the culture of multiculturalism and the giving up of Western values in the name of radical Islam and the reversing of the aggressor and the victim, so that in the case of Israel, when she talks about that, Israel, who has been a victim for 63 years, is mostly perceived as the neighborhood bully and the aggressor and the world's main impediment to world peace. And on campuses around the world, nowhere is it more clear and pervasive that the world has been turned upside down, that the true narrative about what Israel really is and what it does has been flipped on its head with lies and distortions and academic and pseudo-academic conferences and events and publications that give some credibility to what is really a distortion of fact, a remaking of what Israel represents, and in a vicious and sometimes, again referring to one of Richard's great quotes, a morally sadistic way turns Israel's and Israelis into the new Nazis, as we've seen in a number of instances in earlier talks. So today I'm going to talk to you briefly about this concept that I've come up with, that Israel's brand has been hijacked. There's a book called Brand Hijack, written by Alex Wepperfurth, who's a marketing consultant in England. And he talks about brand hijacking. A brand hijack takes place when the consumers of a brand, such as Apple computers, Doc Marten boots, Harley Davidson's, Mattel dolls, Barbie dolls, when the consumers of a brand love the brand so much that they take over the marketing of it. This is something that companies love, because when your consumers love your product, they go out in the world and tell everybody and all of their friends, buy this product, use this product because it's a great thing and I like it. And we tend to believe what our friends tell us about a product more than we believe about what the marketers of that product tell us. So brand hijacking can be a positive thing. But brand hijacking also occurs when the enemies or competitors of a brand take over the narrative or the marketing or the description of the brand. And in the case of Israel, the world's perception of Israel largely has been formed through the narratives of the enemies of Israel, of those who wish to paint a picture of what Israel is in their minds: the main impediment to world peace, a racist regime, an apartheid state, the oppressor of the poor, helpless, perennially victimized Palestinians, the stealer of Arab land. All of those are historically and factually untrue. And it's very easy to demonstrate they're untrue if you're willing to listen to it. But the enemies, the brand hijackers of Israel, have been so successful in perpetrating this narrative, this lethal narrative, that they have been accepted as if they were speaking truth. So I wanted to show you through some imagery how this brand hijacking has taken place in the context of academia on college campuses. And this is driven not only by Muslim student groups and Students for Justice in Palestine and other student organizations, but by faculty who help promote and co-sponsor these activities, who include parts of these lethal narratives in their teaching and programmatic activities, who are in many ways legitimizing some of the false narratives by giving academic credibility to it, because they're running Middle Eastern studies departments, or they're sponsoring colloquia, or they're speaking at conferences like this that are designed to be totally one-sided with no representation or input from the other side. And so that the conclusions that these conferences and academic events reach are not only reliably one-sided and biased against Israel, but factually untrue, and violate what we would hope goes on in universities. This poster is from an Israel Apartheid Week at a Canadian university. And I think the imagery depicts very concisely what has happened to the image of Israel. And it encapsulates many of the motifs and themes that pervade not only the Al-Dura narrative in the world press and in the public imagination, but specifically on university campuses, and particularly about the Israel Apartheid Week. The fact that you can have something on 240 campuses every year calling Israel an apartheid state when no apartheid exists there, and can do it without being embarrassed, and are not only doing it, but are happy you're doing it and publicly are doing it, tells you something about the world's ability to absorb and believe this false narrative about Israel. Israel is depicted in this poster, as it usually is, as a subhuman, mechanical, militaristic, sadistic murderer of innocent Arabs, here depicted by a child holding a teddy bear. This is the blood libel. This is the medieval blood libel resurrected, so that instead of Jews in Europe killing Christian children for the blood for matzahs, now Jews in Israel are killing Arab children for not only for their blood, but for mere sport, or as part of their Nazi-like behavior. So this idea that the Jew in Israel, or the Israeli, is not a human thing, it's a mechanical thing, and it's a sadistic thing, and that the Arabs are inherently innocent of anything, and that they're living in some kind of a concentration-like prison, perpetrating this idea that the Jews have become the Nazis themselves, who are now imprisoning the poor, defenseless, and innocent Arab children, only to kill them for no apparent reason other than the fact that they're inconvenient for the Jewish cause. There's another British guy who runs a marketing firm, Simon Anholt, who does a nation brand index on a regular basis. What he does is he does a questionnaire with thousands of respondents, and he has them measure their attitudes about different countries based on whether they would like to live there, what's their perception of them, and so forth. Why do they do that? Because nations do branding in the same way that companies do, and for the same reason. They want tourists to come to see them, they want businesses to develop there, and they want themselves to be looked at as something favorable. Well, he does this survey, and where do you think Israel ends up on his list? At the bottom of the list. And this is a list that has North Korea and Yemen and China, and countries where human rights abuses, lack of transparency in the legal system and in the press are paramount. How does Israel drop to the bottom of a list like that? Here's another study that just came out this year. Look, views of different countries. Look at the mainly negative views of Israel. It's the fourth from the bottom, above North Korea, Pakistan, and Iran. What's going on here? How does this happen? It can't be based on the reality of what Israel is, with more venture capital firms than any country on earth except America, with a transparent government, a free press, and with human rights privileges given to its Arab and non-Jewish citizens in a way that they would enjoy in no other surrounding country. A thriving Western-like democracy with a standard of living and values that are shared by us and most civilized countries on earth. Yet it's coming down at the bottom barely above countries with despotic regimes that give nothing to their populaces. And this trend is dipping and getting worse. What's happening here? How does this happen? So Israel does its own branding, as you know. That one on the far left, Maxim magazine in the early 2000s said, well, how could we appeal to young men and get them to like Israel better? So they did a pictorial shoot of women of the IDF in bathing suits. And here's other tourism type of promotions, which is typical of the way that we would speak of ourselves if we were a country that wanted to attract the world's attention and to like us. But how is Israel branded by its enemies? This is the image of Israel that's reflected in the brand survey that is done, because they asked the respondent.
So the last slide thing, if you can see the map, I would like to refer to it later on.
Okay.
Perhaps turn the lights down so it's visible.
Turn the lights up.
So here are images, including one on a college campus with the beloved Norman Finkelstein coming. But again, the image of the Palestinian throwing a rock at a tank, it's the exact same image that we saw in the Apartheid Week poster. Why? Because it's a poor, defenseless, and seemingly innocent Arab youth up against the mighty, imperialistic, sadistic, militaristic, non-personal might of Israel. The posters on the left was, again, resurrecting this blood libel, where a group said, why should we be spending $35 billion on Israel over 10 years when all they want to do is kill Arab children? As if that's Israel's reason to exist. Of course, absent from any of these conversations is why there's a so-called apartheid wall in Israel. It wasn't built to separate colored Arabs from white European Jews. It was built to keep Jews from being murdered by terrorists. So the security fence has a reason for being there, but of course that's never discussed in the conversations about it when it's alluded to as an apartheid wall. Irwin Cutler, who some of you may know, a member of parliament in Canada, and a great human being and human rights advocate, made an observation that I thought was very telling, that the greatest condemnation or accusation you could make in the 20th century was to condemn somebody as being a racist. And he said, and where is racism most defined and most accused of being in existence in the 20th century? In Nazism and in apartheid. Well, isn't it interesting that those two labels are promiscuously assigned to Israel now? A Nazi apartheid regime. And this moral sadism of calling Israelis Nazis, where many of Israelis are themselves children of the Holocaust, but are now accusing of being themselves Nazi, is not only historically inaccurate and grossly overstated, but in a way morally depraved. I think Richard had referred earlier to Martin Kramer. He did a very interesting book, Ivory Towers in the Sand, in which he evaluates Middle Eastern studies departments, where he says they are populated by what he called tenured incompetence. These people that have been recruited to in a kind of Arab and Middle Eastern affirmative action program, where entire departments have been hijacked by people that have one agenda, one outlook on the Middle East, with, as Ruth Wise said, they were obsessed with the obsession of the Palestinians, to the extent that all of these so-called scholars of the Middle East and Middle Eastern studies were asleep at the wheel. They didn't see the rise of Islamism. They didn't see 9/11 coming. They were too concerned about state building of all the depravities of Israel and the necessity to bring to statehood the Palestinian cause. This idea of social justice is also something, and I was talking about this with Leonard this morning because Brandeis University has social justice as part of its institutional mission. But the idea of social justice as it relates to the Palestinian cause has been perverted in a way so that Palestinians and pro-Palestinians are able to recruit students by saying that helping the Palestinians achieve justice, getting them statehood, is something that necessitates and justifies the elimination of Israel, if that is what's necessary. The danger of this idea of social justice, as Richard has told me before, that it's a zero-sum game. That social justice doesn't mean that the Palestinians and the Israelis get justice. Social justice, like the Occupy movement, means that the victim gets justice, and the victim gets justice by replacing or displacing the victimizer, in this case Israel. So social justice for the Palestinian cause and those who support it and seek it means that they're striving towards the extirpation of Israel with a Palestinian Islamic state in its place. Not two states living side by side in peace, a Palestinian state. The fate of the Jewish state is irrelevant. And in fact, the idea that the Jews are the new Nazis makes their extermination even more tolerable. That's the danger of this narrative. That's why this is a lethal narrative. Because if you excuse the vagaries and pathologies of the Arab world in attacking Israel because you say, well, Israel stole the land anyway. Israel has no moral right to exist because it shouldn't be there in the first place. And now it's behaving just like the Nazis. It's committing genocide on the Palestinians. If you believe all those things and you embrace them, you are opening the way for the world to again stand still as the Jewish state or Jews are murdered in the name here of social justice. That's the danger of this seemingly benign movement, this seemingly benign thing. When college students see these lectures and they see the word social justice, who wouldn't get behind that? Why wouldn't you think that's a good thing? But it's become part of the trope and the narrative. How are we doing on time?
10 minutes left for the whole session.
So we should probably wrap up. Yeah. All right, so I want to give you guys an opportunity to ask questions of any and all of us. So this is a 60-slide deck, so I usually do 3 hours and no questions. But thank you for coming, and we're going to open the floor to any questions that you would have.
Sim, you want to moderate?